So regarding Jewish mysticism, how would you define classical Jewish mysticism, and does it differ from popular Kabbalah, which has taken Judaism by storm since its appearance in the centuries post Maimonides? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's a challenging question. I think the macro way that I look at it, I'm by no means an expert on the topic, but the macro way that I've looked at it, and I've really understood from the Sefarim that I've read and the people that I've learned from. Rabbinic mysticism generally was subjective. So it was about going through some sort of self-actualization where you have that that moment of acquiring the world. It's known in Talmudic terms as konei olam. So you've acquired the world. You've had this moment of clarity, this moment of enlightenment, this mystical experience where you've almost understood the purpose of your life. Harambam refers many times in the Moreh to these flashes of lightning where you have this clarity, but he calls them these brief moments, these flashes of lightning. So it's not a state that maintains. They're momentary flashes, and that's why light is very much connected with mysticism generally in many cultures. So having those moments of subjective clarity, that seems to be what rabbinic mysticism is very much around, and Pardes is connected to that. Pardes, classically has nothing to do with exegesis, so nothing to do with interpretive tools. That's very much something that was developed from the Zohar and then evolved. Pardes in Persian and it means paradise, and in the Gemara it relates to this garden, so it's a paradise, and that's why mystical stuff with regards to the Pardes, it's very, very, very subjective. Then we fast forward, and there are many different types of Kabbalah. Initially, obviously, it was developed with Yitzchak the Blind in Ashkenaz, and people think that it was originated in Sepharad, but actually no, it was originated in Ashkenaz among the circle of Yitzchak the Blind. It came to northern Spain, which wasn't considered Sepharad, because northern Spain was Christian Spain. Christian Spain was Christian Spain. Southern Spain was considered Sepharad. And we know with Maran, he distinguishes between the Minhag of Catalonia and the Minhag of Sepharad. We have Ibn Ezra, Harambam, they always write off their name with Sepharadi, but the Hachamim of the Ramban, Nachmani, the Rashba, who everyone considers being classical Sepharadi in that sense, no, they were Spanish, their teachers were Ashkenazi, and they were in Christian Europe. And Christian Europe was very, very different to Islamic Europe, and southern Spain was Islamic. Now, the Kabbalah that developed, there's a distinction between the Torah Avari and the Kabbalah Avari. We know he didn't write that much. And the Kabbalah that developed after him in his name, and sometimes separate to his name. And that Kabbalah, I think, the later developments of it, the original one, who knows, that seems to be much more about objectivity. So we don't see the subjective nature of mysticism as we did with rabbinic mysticism, with how Chazal dealt with it. We see it as, okay, we've got this objective reality, which is these upper realms of the world. You do A, B will happen. You do C, you will impact the skies in a form of D.
Right.
It's recycled Gnosticism in a way.
Yes, there are many who are there are Hachamim as well as academics who have made the connections with Gnosticism of this later developed Kabbalah, not necessarily what Torah Ta'ari was. Again, it's very difficult for us to know what Torah Ta'ari was, because you have to remember
we don't have it.
We don't have it. There were no writings, and Kabbalah was very private. It was very intimate. It wasn't something that was distributed and spread across to everybody. That was, again, a much later development. But what we do know is that this categorization of God, as though he is this part and that part and this part and the Sefirot, essentially. I mean, I forgot who it was. I have to remember, there was a Hacham, a Rishon, who said that the Christians believe in 3 and the Kabbalists believe in 10.
Is that the Rivash?
I think it may have, I think it may have been the Rivash. Or a student of the Rivash, or someone in his circle. Yeah. Now that's a little bit, for me, even that I would say maybe a little bit unfair. Why? Because for me, the way that I've been taught it anyway, Kabbalah, not rabbinic mysticism, Kabbalah, even though you do have these Sefirot and you have these different, compartmentalizations of God, God forbid, if one could say such a thing, they're not to be taken seriously. I think the issue is when people take them literally and seriously.
Right.
I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between taking something literally and taking it with a certain level of what's it trying to say. So we have it in the Torah. Say that again.
I'm on your side with this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so you have to.
the issue are there are some groups
I
that
never took it that you're supposed to
Yeah.
understand that literally.
so like
But you're lucky to not do that.
Yes.
But the problem is
that's
you
true.
that's you doing that and me doing that
True.
and many of our hachamim doing that. But what we've seen, unfortunately, is that we have created a whole new way of thinking in Judaism and a whole new way, unfortunately, of practicing.
Yeah.
And we know Hacham Ovadia says, Lo b'shamayim hi. And that's why, we have Ben Ish Chai followers who had burnt Hacham Ovadia's books in Hacham Ovadia's time. Why? Because Hacham Ovadia, for him, Kabbalah is Kabbalah. We don't bring it into the practical. We just had this week's parasha. The angels went up, but don't forget, the last destination was the fact that they came back down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it has to be back with reality.
Well, I
And
think
the
the apologists, like even the Ramchal, who was brilliant and obviously is trying to defend these ideas, like you said, and not to take them literally. He was doing so because of the rampant abuse of these ideas, and even in the Hasidut movement, a lot of them developed ideas of panentheism due to these to the taking these things literally.
Yeah.
And the issue I think could also be that, forgive me if maybe I'm wrong, is that at a certain point, the Ein Sof permeates into material, which is, the world of Shekhinah and Malchut and all that, and the idea of uniting the Kucha Brichus.
Yes, no, this is another level. This is another level, 100%. This is another level, and that's when you can start getting into the murky waters, because we know, Harambam was clear, the Geonim were clear. Ibn Ezra is clear on what happens with the anthropomorphization of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we also have to remember something Harambam did. Harambam, the chief, anti-anthropomorphizer. The way that he asks us to relate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like a woman that we have, as I said, your termizeh, even more than the love that we have for a woman, right? You can't get more anthropomorphic than that. But what Harambam was doing was the right way of anthropomorphism, which is that, look, at the end of the day, our interactions with HaKadosh Baruch Hu are lahavdil in a way, our interactions with a computer desktop. What do I mean? You have these icons on your desk, right? These icons aren't real. They're not actually there. It's not a real thing, this icon that I'm dragging now. It's the interface. It's the user interface for which we interact with it. Behind it, oh my gosh, it's very real. The algorithms, everything they're there. Right? And you'll feel that it's real when you drag one of your most famous and most precious files into the recycle bin. You will really feel how real it is. But it's not. The interface is not. But we have to interface like that with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're told to. The Torah, forget the Zohar, forget the Kabbalah. The Torah could not be more anthropomorphic if it tried. Why? Because at the end of the day, we know that the Torah speaks in the language of man. Chazal say this, a few times. The issue is when it's taken into a practical cycle. First of all, law is law, and law should only be determined by legal process, not by Magid, not by angels. Hacham Ovadia. People think Hacham Ovadia was talking about this only with regards to the Ari. When he talked about the Baracha of Hanoten LaYoef Koach. There's a famous teshubah where the Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't do that. The Beracha, why? Because there's no source for it in the Talmud. But they say that, had they seen that the Ari says you should do it,
right?
They would have all ruled accordingly that yes, you should do it. Hacham Ovadia says Lo b'shamayim hi.
Yeah.
The Ari is another posek. He's not a, it's not a. Sorry, no, he's not another posek. It's another opinion, right?
Yeah.
We don't bring that, and people think it's just about that. But actually, no, it's not just about the Ari. There was another one. It was a French Rav. I forgot the book. I have to remember. It was a 14th century French Rav. And the Chida says that had Maran seen the works of this French Rav who had created a whole sefer on halacha with regards to his conversations with angels, he said, had Maran seen this, he would have ruled according to him as well. Hacham Ovadia says no, because conversations with an angel do not determine law.
Well, he himself, Maran himself, wrote that the angel had that his Magid had nothing to do with Shulchan Aruch.
Exactly, and that's a very, very important point as well, because people know about the Magid of the Bet Yosef, but they don't realize that it wasn't there to impact the halachic process. Again, the halachic process. We know that it was it's a majority 2 versus 3, 2 versus 1. So that's how the Shulchan Aruch works. But this is, I think. The issue for me, and again, I'm reading Hacham Ben Amosek, one of the most incredible classical Sephardi Hachamim. Kabbalah is on every single page. Yeah. Every single page. Hacham Fa'ur. in Shiurim. I've heard him quote the Zohar many times. But again, it's about accepting the truth regardless of the source.
Right.
It's about, is it something that we take as being, whether Shimon Bar Yochai wrote it or didn't wrote it, that could be a grander machloket amongst others. The real question is, Lo b'shamayim hi. Is that valid? Do we accept that? Or do we start bringing in metaphysical realities, or not even realities, metaphysical theories and ideas into our day-to-day living? And according to our approach, according to our Mesorah, by our, I'm talking about the Geonic Sephardi approach, and many Ashkenazim, absolutely not. The moment you do that, I mean, I think it was a Khatam Sofer that said that Kabbalah and Halacha is shatnez. And I think when someone like Khatam Sofer says Kabbalah and Halacha is shatnez, you wouldn't necessarily think Khatam Sofer is a classical Sephardi.
Yeah.
But we don't merge those things.
If I may add, I was actually really surprised this notion of Kabbalah being able to infiltrate Halacha. You see in the Akdamat Mishnah of the Rambam, even a Navi who has a prophecy in terms of establishing any sort of law is disqualified from
Absolutely.
You get in a Beit Din from a perspective of, if he does the shakavatari of the using the Yud Gimel Midot, right, that he can do that technically, but as a nevuah,
exactly, that's the distinction. So a prophet as a hacham who's using the 30 midot, look, he's a hacham, he's a judge on the Bet Din. That's different. He's left his nevuah status at the door, and that's why Hacham Ovadia in that teshuvah with Rukas, he makes sure he does not use, because in the end Hacham Ovadia recites it, and he allows you to recite it. So people recite it, it's fine, except for the Yemenites, Morocco, the Spanish and Portuguese, where Spanish and Portuguese, I'm honored to be part of them. As a Persian, I'm part of the Spanish Portuguese. You don't see any Kabbalah in the halacha. I mean, it's practically nothing. He still recited it, but what does he do? He does not rely on the Ari. He gives two other excuses, or not excuses, but reasons as to why. He says, maybe it was a minhag before Maran. And we know that minhagim before Maran, they can be kept. Or he said, okay, maybe it was in Machsov Vitri, in Rashi's Sidur. There's the Sidur of Rashi's Talmudi, maybe because there's a part where you can say the Berachot on your own accord. So maybe this was a Barachah. So what's he doing? Hacham Ovadia is going through everything he can to give validity to saying Hanat Koach, except for relying on the Ari as being, that's the reason why. So that is a very, very important distinction, because people read that Hacham Ovadia and they think, okay, because he did it, that means he accepts it. But no, he goes through, real Masirat HaNefesh to get to that point of saying, no, it's specifically not because of that.
Excellent point. Excellent.
Very good. And also, I think you were getting to the other point that you're making, that the distinction between the Mesorah, the Kabbalah, so to speak, or Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkavah of the Old Sfarad is it's different in a way that it's spontaneous, and it's something that like it happened in a moment, and like you said, but the Kabbalistic understanding that we have today is more something that is formulated, it's written down, it can't be, it's not spontaneous. So therefore that's the part of it that kind of is a little bit suspicious. And again, we over here, we're not trying to burst anyone's bubble in a sense, but we're also just trying to make people realize that there's a tradition that predates all of this, because all of this came after the time of the Rambam. Even whether you believe, like you said, whether you believe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote it or it was Moshe de Leon, the fact of the matter is it appeared in post-Maimonidean times, and nobody previously ever really referenced it or knew that it existed. It wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah, it wasn't mentioned in the Gemara. So that's really why we bring this up, because I feel it's an important topic that a lot of people just don't know about.
Exactly. I think that's a very important point. It's less about saying an approach is right or wrong. It's more about put yourself in the shoes of Sephardim that have followed the way of Sepharad ever since the expulsion.
Like
the Yemenites.
Yep.
Yemenites. I mean, the Yemenites are the Yemenites. People don't realize there are 500,000 Yemenites. People think it's like this small little, that's basically, I think like 100,000 less than Iraqis. And we know Iraqis are like, whoa, Moroccans and Iraqis, there's like loads of them. You got the Yemenites, you got the Spanish and Portuguese, which again, I'm honored to be part of, right? They didn't. Moroccans, up until the point of Ben Ish Chai, they didn't bring Kabbalah into practice. I was speaking with a friend of mine, a big Talmid Hacham, Moroccan Rav, and he said up until the point when Ben Ish Chai came to, his works came to Morocco, it was almost like the Mishneh Torah in the sense that it was accepted suddenly completely by the Moroccans. But we think of Morocco as, oh, historically it's always been like that. Not at all. There's actually a fantastic table that was produced by a Moroccan Hacham, which shows that they followed, the Moroccans followed Shulchan Aruch way more than even Yalkut Yosef does. This is predating Ben Ish Chai. So it's a very, 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 very interesting point you've made, and a very important point, that it's about different approaches. If you put yourself in the shoes of these communities where they've been following a certain way, and it goes according to Chazal. I mean, we don't have mention of any of these things in the Talmudic literature, right? Yeah. Especially when it comes to the due process, when it comes to legalities.
Right.
A Bet Din Hagadol, a Sanhedrin, where they sit down and they have to deduce the law according to very strict protocol, to say that we take the legal system out and we determine things via an angel. For those who represent that Mesorah, with those, the Hachamim, that throughout the ages have been following how their parents taught them and their ancestors taught them and their Rabbanim taught them, it's more about respecting this Mesorah. Hacham Ratzanu Rossi, huge Hacham, he's the chief rabbi of Kiryat Ono, is part of the Rabbinic Council, or the chief Rabbinic Council in Israel. To say that his approach is just to be ignored, right. This approach that goes all the way back to when the Sfaradim arrived in Yemen. I know Yemen has an older history. I think it's not only offensive, but it's factually wrong.
And I think Sfaradim are also very sensitive to this, in Kabbalah, like you said before, we're sensitive to the idea that there's even even a description of separate notions of God, where obviously we learn Harambam and it's all about understanding an unique unity and absolute unity, and these notions are problematic. Even in his time when the Zohar wasn't around, but books like Shir Kolma were around, he said this book should be burned. It's very anthropomorphic. We're trying. The Torah already does that for us, like you said. We're trying to show the negative theology. We're trying to negate all those things. So I think it's an important matter for people to really understand where the Sephardim are coming from. We're obviously defensive of the unity and oneness of Hashem.
There's a definite focus and approach in the Maimonidean Sephardi world in focusing on God's unity, as opposed to trying to bring God into our terms too much, obviously. So that's something we're always gonna, Sephardim are classically and always will have and like you said,
absolutely, and it's a paradox in a way, because at one stage we're told that God is unknowable and it's all negative theology. We cannot say God is anything, but at the same time we're supposed to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as though it's greater than the lust of a woman. I think that's the beautiful beauty of the paradox. Yeah. I don't think it's personally, I don't see an issue with the abstract ideas of either position. It's how they practically manifest.
Yes.
But it just so happens to be that certain approaches can manifest in things that could be that can lead to very, very worrying
trying to appeal to an aspect of God's mercy versus his judgment. The way the people do things, were, for example, using certain rituals or superstitions and so on and so forth, to try to kind of twist God's arm, so to speak. Right. So that's where it becomes problematic. Of course, I think that's where everybody really we're all on the same page. But
this is what's very important about it. It's not just us. I mean, you think about. I know Rav Yihya Kafach is controversial in many circles. He has a whole book, Melchamot Hashem. Now, whether you agree with everything in there or not, or you agree with none of it. Look, this is a Hacham, a huge Hacham, Chief Rabbi Osana in Yemen. For him, it was, hold on a second, we've just brought the tradition of Safarad and the Gaonim here to Yemen, and suddenly something's arrived here, whether it's from Rabbi Yochai or not. For him, it wasn't even, that's not even, we have a certain approach of how we come to God, and this is how our ancestors taught us, and now you're asking us to come to approach God in a different way. Right. That's why he wrote that Sefer, which interestingly enough is on Safaria now. I was very surprised to see it on Safaria. So there's it's about different approaches, not necessarily about what's right or wrong.
Right.
But I think the difference is between a Spinoza and a Shabtai Tzvi. There's the extremes on one side versus the other side.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's good to have either. But what I would say is that Spinoza was put in Cherem. Shabtai Tzvi was accepted hook, line, and sinker by every single community, except, thank God, for the Spanish and Portuguese. In the United Kingdom, you have to read the fantastic book, Dissident Rabbi, written by Jacob Dweck. Hacham Sasportas, Hacham Yaakov Sasportas. He was the senior rabbi of the S&P Sephardic community here in the UK, the predecessor of Rabbi Dweck. He was the dissident rabbi. He was the one who went against everyone else and said, hold on a second, this guy is not the real deal. So people are always worried about the
I
extreme of
think
one
Rabbi
side.
Dweck talked about this in his intro to Mesilat Yesharim Shir. In his
Yes, at the beginning. Yes, he did.
Yes,
Yes,
he
he did at the
mentioned how he
beginning.
felt that the only reason the community survived was because
Exactly. And there's a chut of that because we don't realize what that was. Shabtai Tzvi was not some lunatic in some weird, cultish thing.
Takeover of
It
Judaism.
was takeover. I mean, it's still there are minhagim that people do. The Turkish, the Amsterdam, the Dutch, these communities, but they still do based on his appearance.
Right.
But
He was riding the Lurianic Kabbalah wave that just basically started to come about. And actually, Chacham Portas, who you mentioned, is a key figure in Gershom Sholom's book, Shabtai Tzvi. So it's a fascinating part of history that is actually swept under the rug too much. And we should all be learning it. I think it's, even if we do learn it, it's like, oh, there was a false messiah named Shabtai Tzvi. Nobody knows that a lot of rabbis converted to Islam with him because he wanted to raise the nitzotzot and of Islam because it had an element of monotheism in it, and this is the kind of stuff that people should know. These are the dangers of of falling, going all in on these ideas.
Exactly, and there's dangers
on both
sides.
Again, it continues today. There's false messianic movements, and this is what the Vilna Gaon actually warned about.
Absolutely, the Vilna Gaon absolutely.
He said you should learn Torah you should learn Kabbalah at 40, which basically means like don't learn Kabbalah because by the time you're 40, you're not started learning new tricks.
Or I would interpret that as you come to the sophistication of not taking it literally. Right. Because when you're 40, you realize not everything's so literal.
You're developed.
Yeah?
Exactly.
I think you're developed where you're not childish enough to take these things literally. Your brain's developed where you're like, obviously, because think about it, we're kids, we take everything literally. Kids, when you tell a kid I'm leaving as a father to a son, they take it literally. You're not coming back. They throw a fit. They go nuts. You're literally leaving. No, I'm going for 10 minutes. I'm coming back. So I think there's that idea of age is associated with studying these things also because there's a concept of development and being able to distinguish between what to take literally and what to take seriously.